Okay, so last session of the day today is on achieving efficiency with workflows. This session, I thought around it is, again, you know, we talk about ERP systems as going from kind of being transactionally processing your accounting to start enabling you to run your business. And you know, most people when they move into the mid-market like you guys are, you kind of usually the drivers, you know, okay, we needed to process a few invoices, and that's now changed. We want to start managing our business based on information. As we start to extend up the chain, we start to get into things of having the system ensure that we do things in a consistent way, that we do things in a complete way, that we don't miss things when process changes. We're able to do those things. And so today's session is really about different options for doing a few of those things. We're going to talk about three different tools actually. We're going to talk about how they compare to each other, where they might apply, and some of the experiences that we kind of have with them. So really at the end of the day, you know, when we think about the workflows and which one is the right tool and how do we choose which tool makes sense in a particular implementation, there's a couple of different things that come into play. You know, really, you know, one of the first things that we're going to talk about is our business drivers. We're going to talk about who in the organization this affects, and about three very specific tools from Microsoft. So at the end of the day, you know, when I think about why we put in workflow, what are the types of things that we do, there's a few things that are important there. And probably the first one, it relates around consistency. You know, as you start to get more and more people, as you start to think outside of just the finance group, within the organization, or when there's people change or whatnot, we want our customers, we want our employees, we want our vendors, all the people we interact with to have a consistent experience. We put some effort into, you know, defining processes within your organization, and this is about making sure that those things happen the same way regardless of who's doing it. It also helps, it's important to make sure that if those things need to get handed off, involve different people, that we have consistency, because it gives us a better customer experience. And you know, often you know, when you're smaller, hard thing to do, but as you get larger, it becomes far more important. Second one is around visibility. So you know, one of the goals that we are looking at when we're thinking about this kind of automation is not only can we run a consistent process, but we can also tell where it is. If I'm coming in partway through, what has already happened, why has it happened, what has been out of process, what has been different, what has been unique, so that I know I'm picking it up and I'm not having to start asking my customer questions. Why did I do this? Why did this happen? Did this happen? Just checking in a few of those types of things. The third one starts to come in around accountability, you know, whether it's IFRS or whether it's different types of controls within your organization, or stuff from the auditors, separation of duties and controls. It's around accountability. It's around, you know, being able to say, okay, how do we know this happened? How can we ensure that it happened without me having to micromanage, watch everything, double check everything across the organization? And you know, obviously the fourth one would be because someone else is telling us we have to. It's important to make sure that we know what happened, why it happened, and when we're proving it, when we start hitting, you know, when the auditors come to visit us and you know, start to look for breakdowns in what's happened in the organization. So usually when, you know, people start moving from I'm transactionally processing my accounting system to, you know, enabling some sort of workflow, we're being pushed by somewhere in along this list. Typically, you know, when we think about workflow, it starts often within the sales side of our business, and I don't know whether that's because salespeople are generally often our mavericks in the organization. They're you know, they're people who are good at you know, talking, but you know, the follow through, the details, like why won't our technology work? You know, those are the type of people that we're trying to hit within the organization. Is where often many workflows start. Having said that, that's not where it should end. There's a lot of other groups that we start to hit, you know, and usually after sales, you know, the next people who typically get involved is you guys, is in around finance. And I think a lot of that is because, you know, as we, within the finance group, we're the people who have to pick up the pieces. We're the ones who have to deal with the mistakes when they happen. We're the ones who have to make sure it was done properly, it was done completely, that all the details happen. So, you know, we tend to be the people who are who benefit significantly from it and are punished heavily when it's not followed. So usually these are good champions of workflow within the organization. But it doesn't need to stop there either. Once we get there, we start thinking about, how it impacts operations. We're starting to get, a little bit more into the running of the business as opposed to the management of the business. A little bit more into, how do we make sure that stuff flows all the way so that what started with a customer, a vendor, a lead, an opportunity gets processed properly, but gets through the operational, gets delivered out to people. It starts to hit other people in the organization as well. And obviously then we can start thinking about how it ties into management as well. When we think about approvals, when we have escalations, when we have exceptions, when we have some of those types of things. So certainly another group that we can't forget about. But at the end of the day, once you get beyond those groups, there's other people that are impacted by workflow, or can be, for properly implemented workflow. We start thinking about our employees. Ultimately, we all know, if we don't treat our employees well, we tend to lose the best ones. And, so workflow is, again, about providing a consistent experience for them, to keep them happy, to keep them flowing throughout the organization. It extends to other people, contractors as well. A little more temporary in and out, a little more fluctuation, probably a good opportunity to make sure our interaction with them is consistent, that we have all their paperwork in place, that we collect back all the personal equipment that we loan them, that we as we kind of go along. And ultimately, customers is an obvious one, but vendors as well. How we, typical things that we, need to do with vendors. Reviewing price lists with them, sitting them down on an annual basis, talking about SLAs, interactions between us. When we start thinking about workflows of saying our processes, we do this, it goes to the vendor, it comes back. I want to make sure the whole end-to-end process happens smoothly and efficiently. So these can be consumers or benefactors of workflow as well. And when we're choosing the right one, why do we choose one versus another? Where are we going with it? It's important to also think about those types of things. It's also important to think about how people consume this, how they work with it. So it doesn't become an extra system, an extra place to go, an extra system or an extra application to have to open. It can't be cumbersome for it in order for it to be effective. So we start thinking about who is going to be interacting, but also how are they going to be interacting. Obviously computers are, a lot of people in this office, we all have a computer on our desk. That's not necessarily the world we're coming to. It was enlightening for me I was talking to Mitchell a little bit about a little bit of stuff that's going on at school, and it kind of dawned on me when he said, how many of my people or my peers don't even have a computer anymore? Things are changing. PDAs, smartphones, tablets are certainly places that we're seeing on a very, very regular basis now. But it goes even further. You hear talk about the Internet of Things. Workflows can be interactions between those devices as well in our process. Something happens and it generates an automatic event. I pull a carton of milk out of the fridge and it starts to create a list for me and has a look at my inventory and decides that I need to do this and tell someone about this and interact with some of those things. So we have kind of the current, the where we've been, the where we are, and as we even start thinking of how we're going forward, we want to consider where we're going when we're deciding what's the right tool and how we might do those types of things. So we're going to talk how to solve those things, and we're going to talk specifically about 3 different tools. They certainly aren't all of them. They're certainly not all-encompassing of every scenario of every way we can do it, but they are certainly things that are relevant to this group. So we're going to look at the 3 different tool sets. The first one being Dynamics GP workflows, which Terry alluded to an example, some of the HR types of things. Renee is going to talk a little bit about some of the other ones that are available. We're then going to talk a little bit about Dynamics 365, Office 365 kind of workflow tools. So covering things, like Flow and to a lesser extent some of the SharePoint. And then we'll also talk about the Dynamics 365, the CRM, the Marshall, and where those things fit. So with that, you're up.
All right.
Yeah, sorry, I got quickly.
All right, so Dynamics GP, most of you guys are using it today, and some of the, I don't know how many, who's all using GP workflows today, or is anyone in in here using GP workflows. Okay, perfect. Anyways, we have a couple clients who are using it, who are finding it quite useful, but some of the key things that you use GP workflows for are, one, flowing data for creating master files, creating customers, creating vendors, making sure that the right people look at it at the right time, and make sure that the information that is getting entered has been reviewed, gone through the proper review process to make sure that it is valid information. The other part is transactional automation. So, purchase order invoices, flowing those through, make sure they go through the right steps to basically get those vendors paid. And the key thing that GP does with its workflows is it gives you the opportunity to set up different conditional paths. So in some scenarios, one person's going to have to approve it. In other scenarios, someone else might need to approve something. So it's going through the process of setting up those conditional paths. This diagram basically goes through the different versions of GP and which workflows have been made available in those versions. So as you can see, the red ones, the right-hand most, we have GL account approval. So, creating GL accounts and making sure the right person has approval process to make sure you can let a junior staff person create the account, but that account can't get used until a senior accountant presses the approve button on it. Some other ones are purchase. I'm having troubles reading that. Anyways, so as you can see, the different versions of GP brought in different versions of the workflows, starting all the way from GP 2013. So we had a few happening. That's when they came out with this tool set, 2013, and have been evolving it ever since then. So I'll be touching on one specifically, but you can always get the slide and dig into whether or not the workflows are there that you want to have. And this is an area that GP is continuously evolving. And if you find that there's other areas that you would like to see GP attach workflows to, we strongly recommend using that Microsoft Connect. Connect to them. They always use the information that people enter on Microsoft Connect to determine what features they're going to add in new versions of GP. So I'm going to just jump into GP here briefly, and I'm going to walk through what's all involved in setting up the approvals. And as I go through it, you'll probably find that it's really not that complex. There might be a couple steps that you might need some assistance with, depending on how in-depth you want to get into setting up these workflows. So I'm going to go into the GP configuration area, and I'm going to first go to the workflow setup. This is a system-wide configuration item that you're going to do within GP to determine whether or not you want to use workflow. So for example, first checkbox I have is enable email for workflow. So when I turn on the feature, I want to be able to have GP send emails. I'm going to say what account are the emails going to come from and such, and how is that information going to pass through. This one at the bottom here, enable email actions, is a really neat feature with GP workflow that you can send out emails to end users of the workflow. So say I want to send something to the VP of operations and have this person do an approval. Well, most VPs of operations are not going into GP. However, you can include information, you can include all the information that's required on the email, and if you have that enable email actions on it, you actually have an approve reject buttons or links right on the emails, and it uses GP Web Services to do the approval or the rejection. So they don't even have to touch GP. The approvals can happen without accessing the system, which is a really nice feature of GP, or of the workflows. So that's set up system-wide, so you do that setting once for all of your companies if you have multiple companies. Brad?
So that doesn't require GP licenses?
GP licenses?
When you send the VP operations,
Yeah, correct. They don't consume a GP license. They have to be set up essentially as their account needs to be configured to identify who they are, essentially, but not even in GP, just in the workflow criteria, which I'll get to. So the next area, which is really the meat of configuring your workflows, is the workflow maintenance window. I am running GP 2016 here, so there are a few of the new workflows, such as the account one, that isn't available here. But as you can see, as I go through each of the different modules, so for example, financial, here's the general ledger batch approval, sales, receivables batch. So as I go through the different modules, it shows all the different workflows that are available to me to configure. And as I go through to configure a workflow, so I'm going to do purchase order approvals. I find that one a fairly easy one to describe, because everyone has purchasing type transactions that happen in an organization. So first thing you need to identify when you pick any of these workflows is who is a manager. So the managers for workflows are essentially the people who are the kind of the super users of that process. So they might be the ones who are going to do the configuration of the workflows. So they're going to say, okay, I want to set up the criteria to say if it's over this dollar amount, it goes to this person. If it's from this vendor, it goes to this person. They're going to set up those criteria. And then ultimately, they'll also have the capability of, if for some reason there needs to be a catch-all for the approval, to say someone's not here, they forgot to turn on, they're out of office, or they forgot to delegate, we need to take care of this approval because they're not here and it's just stuck in limbo and we don't have it to automatically go to someone. The manager is the person who has the ability to either approve it on their behalf or to delegate it to a different person if they need to.
Can you see the status of, let's say, open processes like at any given time? Like it started 2 weeks ago and it stopped, and then you can see why it stopped, like where it stopped.
I'll give you some views as I go into the workflow. So I'll show you the views where you see all of the individual items that are requiring approval and what stage they're at. So essentially that is more or less what you're looking for. And yeah, so I'm just going to go through and create a brand new workflow. So for purchase order approval, so I'm just going to say new workflow, and I'm going to type this Renee's demo test. And so you start off with a blank workflow in this case. If I wanted to copy from another workflow and use that, I can. One key thing is you can only have one workflow active for purchasing process. So right now, as you can see, I have this Fabricam PO approval, which is the one that's turned on. Once I want to enable mine, it's going to deactivate that one. It's going to activate mine because we can only have one set of rules. So you've got to incorporate all of your different workflow, your workflow tree in that set of rules. But I'm going to keep it fairly simple. So some of the options you have for the workflow is, do I want to send notifications for completed actions? So if I say yes to that, I can say whoever originated the workflow, send them a notification when the workflow is when a workflow step has completed, or when the entire workflow has been approved and such. So we have these notification emails that we can send out. Allow the approver to delegate tasks. So if I have this turned on, that gives the approver to say, hey, I don't want to approve it myself, I want someone else to approve it. So by checking that, it gives the approver the ability to forward it on to someone else. If I have it unchecked, the only option the approver has is approve or reject. They don't have the opportunity to send it to someone else. Allow the originator to be an approver. So in that case, whoever enters the transaction, do you want to allow them to approve their transactions, their own invoice? So that, depending on what's important for you guys on the flow, you may allow that anyways, just because they're the manager, maybe a small operation. But the key thing that to keep in mind, Gord alluded to earlier, is the visibility. So even if you mark the originator to be an approver, the visibility that you have when you turn workflow on is you can pull up any historical transaction and you can see who approved that transaction. So if they approved it themselves, that audit trail is there. Whereas if you don't have workflow turned on, you don't have that audit trail. And always require at least one approver. So that's in the case of, let's say you have a transaction for $5, you don't want to approve, you don't care about some things like that, you might turn that off and then allow them to just finally go through. And then use alternate final approver. So in that case, this case, if it goes through a structure and I have, you know, the president can always sign off on anything. You might say, okay, use that as an alternate final, or not the president, maybe a VP of finance would be probably a better example of who you might use for an alternate final approver. When a task is overdue, there's the whole workflow functionality has, you can set up a life of how long do you want to wait for something to become overdue. So in case I send it to someone to approve, but they're not around and they're not actioning it within a certain amount of time, what do we want to do in the case of they're not actioning on it soon enough? Do we want to escalate it to the next person down the line? Do we just want to send it to a specific person? Maybe it's, again, the VP of finance or somebody like that. Or do we want to just reject it and send it back to the person who keyed in the order or whatever transaction, and they have to figure out why the person didn't action on it? So we have those options. So I'm just going to go through and create a quick save my workflow. All right, and then I'm going to create a new step. And I'm just going to keep this really simple, but the key thing when you're setting up the steps is you can have as many steps and as many branches as you want. Just try to keep it reasonably simple, otherwise it'll become a difficult task to manage and maintain. So I'm just going to call this approve, and description, we'll just call this test. Action is required always for this step. So if I say if it's always going to happen, I don't care what happened on the transaction, I require an approval. If I want to have a branch or I want to have it redirected in certain scenarios, I'm going to say action is required only when following condition is met. So in this case, I want to say I only want to approve any orders over $500. So I have these different criteria here. So I'm going to say select the field, and I want to say where the where's my subtotal, so that's before tax amount, is greater than and includes $500. Other things you can do with this too is, let's say specific vendors always need to go to certain people. We could set up criteria where, you know, that vendor, if someone's entering an invoice for that vendor, it goes to this person, or I don't know, you can basically do it on any one or multiple fields to determine how these workflows get flowed. And I'll press add, and I'll just say okay. So I'm just keeping it really simple. If condition is not met, I'm going to end it, and then assign to. So this is where you got a little bit of flexibility in how you want things to flow. So for example, if you guys have your Active Directory set up properly, and this you might need to, if you want to use this functionality, you'd have to work with your IT department. But within Active Directory, you have the capability of saying who your boss is, who you report to. And if you want to do that, you can say, I want to use my Active Directory hierarchy, start from my originator, whoever keys it in, and assign it to direct manager. So, you know, it would automatically just go to my boss. So that's one way to do it if you have Active Directory set up. Another way is you might say workflow role. I just might want to assign it to the workflow manager regardless, and it always goes to the workflow manager, or the alternate final approver. It just goes to them automatically, so you have those options as well. But I'm just going to be very simple because I'm demoing here, and so I'm going to assign it to CRM Bob because he's our guy. He does everything. All right, so CRM Bob is the guy I want to do my approval. And then what is my time limit? So you know how I described, you have an expiration date. Do I want to restrict it to 8 hours or 4 hours or 1 hour? What is the time that they have to respond to it? And I also have the ability to send an email. So the send message, send this PO. I just gotta enter a password here. So this, it's a little bit cryptic, but this gives you the capability of formatting the email and adding all the contents to the email, such as the line items of the PO, and having that email get sent. So you have a lot of flexibility on what email you want sent in the case where we want to send it to someone who doesn't have access to the workflow, and they can have the information they need to either approve or reject the email or the workflow. Yes. That's a great question. Should I answer it now or should I wait till I demonstrate? Yeah, yeah, they do. I know. It's like, come on, wow, look. All right, so it's so I'm gonna save my workflow, and I'm going to activate my workflow. So I'm gonna hit active, and yes, I'm gonna deactivate my other workflow. So now we got one workflow called Renee's demo. So what does that mean? So back to, now that we got a workflow set up, where do I see my workflows? First spot is workflow tasks right on your home page. So all workflows that are assigned to you are going to appear right on your home page. And the nice thing about this is regardless of type of workflow. So you'll see purchase orders, vendors, you know, whatever type of workflow, you're going to see them here. The other areas are going to be more workflow specific. So ours is purchase order processing. So I'm just going to go straight into here, and due to, yeah, I'll quickly do up a purchase order. So I'm just going to really quickly do up a purchase order because to a travel company. And as you can see, the attach button automatically pulled in the attachments that were already attached to my vendor. So that's part of the stuff that Andrew was talking about earlier, of how attachments can flow from the vendor. So these attachments are going to flow onto my PO, and as we get there, they'll flow all the way to the email that goes to the approver. When I entered this purchase order, my status is currently not submitted. So I'm just going to quickly throw in a line here. We'll just call it travel one and $1,000, put us over the limit. And I need a location. I want a warehouse. All right. So what can I do with an unapproved workflow? I'm in a PO. I can't print it. There's no option to print the PO. There's no option to send this PO to someone. So from a purchase order perspective, this PO is in a working state. You can't communicate it to the vendor. That's the key element of having a PO workflow. So my options are, now I can submit it, or I can delete or copy it, but I can't print it. So I'm just going to go ahead and submit this workflow, and I can type in a comment. All right. So I went through the exercise, submitted. So now if I pull up that same PO in here, we can see that my approve, yeah, this is one. So it's currently sitting, it's pending approval by 2 approvers at a certain time. I can go to view history, and this is where one of the things I like the most about having approvals is now I have that visibility of where is this at a specific time. And I can see that it's currently assigned to 2 users. And if I go and check my email, okay, maybe I missed a setting.
It did show up on my phone, by the way. I think it's set to go to my email.
Oh, okay. It's
noticed
there. It is. So
I'll send it to you real quick.
yeah, just forward it to me. That's a good idea. So while Gord's forwarding it, the other area that when you're working with workflows is, Terry mentioned navigation panes. Within each navigation area that has workflows, they have subfolders. So purchase order transactions, there's a purchase orders not submitted. So those are all the POs that someone has entered, and you're still waiting for the submit button. Purchase orders pending approvals. So right now, the purchase order I just entered for my $1,000 should be sitting in my pending approval workflow. So as we can see, we got an email finally from someone with our workflow on it. This is okay. So yeah, I forgot to turn on the allow me to approve or reject. So if I had that turned on, I would have an approve reject link on here, which pops open the approve reject comment window, which allows you to approve or reject it. So I apologize, I didn't have that turned on, but yes, sorry.
At this point, is it still that you have to approve or reject the entire set sent to you? Like if it was a batch of payables and there were 10, you would still have to approve all 10. There's no option to approve 9 and hold 1.
Right. So good question. The questions. Do you think we'll pick her up? Okay, good. So essentially, it depends which level you have the approval on. So if it's a batch approval, yes, you can only deal with the batch as a whole. However, if you have the approval set up at the transaction level, so if it's the payables invoice level, then you have each individual invoice will require its own separate approval. So basically from here, I have my invoice that I just entered for $1,000. And from here, I have the capability of approve, complete, reject, or delegate. So delegate, I touched on a little bit, and that's if I want to delegate it to someone else. I have this specified. So if I say I don't want to approve it, I want someone else to approve it, I can delegate it. It'll show in the whole workflow history that it's been delegated, and that person will then have to approve it. There's also a setting, I'm just covering one. There's also a setting within your user preferences that if you're going to leave the office for a period of time, you could set your delegations to automatically go to someone else. So while you're away from GP, it automatically will delegate everything to a different person. Okay?
So with this particular one, can we go in on that PO, and if there's also a document attachment that is there, you can see that?
So I can pop open the PO, and the email, if I had the email specified, I would have gotten the attachments on the email as well. So yes. All right, so basically from here then, I'm just going to approve it, and now that it's approved, that is sitting in my approved and can be printed, or depending on transaction, posted or processed. However.
who can see the workflows? Is it just the person who originated, or if you're the boss, like Gord, can he see what's outstanding?
So it depends on your level, but typically the people who have access to these folders will be able to see the transactions that are sitting in there. If they don't have access to approve reject, they won't, you know, if it's not assigned to them, they won't be able to action on them. It's only the people who are assigned to it or who have the rights to do the approval can do the action on it. Does that answer your question?
Could you then maybe create a report so you can see that kind of information?
Absolutely. Yeah, everything here is available for reporting. Even smart lists, different folders. Yeah. Any other questions? So I'm going to jump into Microsoft Flow. So if there's no other questions, Jim.
Does this work in the manufacturing module?
That is a good thing to add to the Microsoft Connect, because no, there's no workflows that I'm aware of. No, there is none for manufacturing right now. So if you have specific examples, you can send them to me and I can forward it on to Connect, or I would suggest putting it up there.
So you said that was 2016. Was that just the base one, or was it R2? Is it running right here?
I'm going to say R2 because we have payroll installed and we always keep it up to date. So I'm going to assume that.
We just upgraded 2016, so I don't know for R2 or 2016.
We can figure that out.
You'll,
You have-
It's easy to figure.
and chances are, well, Andrew's not here. I'm going to assume that if you just did your update, you'll be at R2, because it'd be silly not to. Usually when we do an upgrade, we're going to bring you to the most latest release that you tested on, that you did your testing at, to get you to that version. All right. I'm going to jump into tool number 2. Oh, that's not my. All right, here we go. So Office 365 workflow. I'm not going to get in as much detail about this, but I really wanted to introduce it to you guys because it is such, it has a lot of capabilities and you can kind of go crazy with it. So 2 components that when we talk Office 365, there's Microsoft Flow, which is a new tool set that Microsoft, a cloud-based tool set that Microsoft is pushing right now. If you guys have Office 365 licenses, if your emails are on Office 365, actually even if they're not, you can make use of Flow. It's a pretty robust tool set, and I'll get into some details in a bit. Another Office 365 product is SharePoint Workflow. So if you're using SharePoint on-premise, I'm not going to get into this in much detail, or actually I'm not going to get into any detail, but SharePoint itself has workflows. If you're using SharePoint on-premise, it gives you the capability of transferring information from one point to another point. But if you're using SharePoint online, I would strongly recommend that instead of using SharePoint Workflow that is built into SharePoint, use the Flow, because it actually integrates with SharePoint as well. So Flow integrates with quite a few different tool sets. And that's, this diagram basically goes through a simple example of what Flow could do. So, Contoso is one of Microsoft's sample companies that they demonstrate. Someone tweets about Contoso. So then you got a notifier that says, hey, Contoso just got tweeted. Let's log who tweeted about us, and let's put it into our CRM system. So using all of these interconnected pieces of Flow, you're able to communicate with a lot of your different business applications and grab information from one website application and push it into another website or application. So if you're using many of these different applications, you got the ability to move data and create information or even get approvals between these different applications. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of what that means. All right, so I'm gonna hop open to Microsoft Flow. First thing, Microsoft Flow, if you want to play around with it, if you want to create a couple sample flows, it's free. It's only once you start hitting a barrier on how many flows you want to have, or if you want to share your flows with other users within your organization, then that's when you start to getting more of the pay per user, kind of the same way that Power BI pricing works, Flow works in a similar fashion. So if you want to create a brand new flow, let's go to my flows. I have some flows that I created already that were just kind of for fun flows. So for example, get a push notification when you receive an email from your boss. So when Gord emails me, so when Gord emails me, I don't want just an email to happen. I want a notification on my phone. It's like, oh, Gord emailed me, so I better, jump on and get back to him. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I have that one turned off. Oops. So another one, you can integrate these workflows. So it's a push of a button, and I have Flow on my phone, so actually I can do it on my phone. A little button on my Flow, and push the button, and I can log work hours and work location, and actually store it in a spreadsheet on my SharePoint Online, and then send information or report on that. Maybe even throw it up to Power BI. So there's ways to take data and move it around and create a simple ad hoc timesheet solution. Nothing like Penny, but it's some sort of timesheet solution. Another one where send me a push notification with my current location. So I'm here and I press the button and it just sends me the address of where I'm at. So just funky little things that you can do. So they have a bunch of templates that come with these flows. So I suggest if you have the opportunity, it's something really funky and if you can do a lot with it. It also has approvals, so I didn't actually talk about that. So if you want, I could say get someone to approve that timesheet one, enter your time, but then it's got to go to someone to approve it. They got to say yes or no and go to their approval section of Flow or approvals on your phone. That's there's a Flow application on your phone and you can do your approvals from there. So one last thing I just want to throw in there, if you're using Flow and if you have some techie people in your organization, there is another tool called Power Apps. Oh, I don't have a link to it right now. But anyways, there's another tool called Power Apps that works with Flow, and you can create, using just some simple drag and drop and maybe a couple little if-thens, you can create your own phone apps that can then interact with Flow as well. So there's some pretty cool stuff that Microsoft is doing, and I suggest if you're interested in it, we can talk to you more, or even just YouTube Power Apps or Flow, and you'll see lots of cool stuff that people have done with these products. So that is what I got. Any questions on Flow before I put it back into Gord's court? All right, I will pass it to Gord. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so two great tools, and we will talk in a few minutes. How do I decide which one, when, what, those types of things. So the third one we're going to talk about is the Dynamics 365 workflow. So the Dynamics 365 workflow really is intended to be embedded primarily within the Dynamics 365 product. So the CRM Online or any apps that you build on top of it. So again, I'm probably not going to go into huge detail on the actual details of the things you can do with the product, but wanted to give you an idea of some of the basic building blocks and how they look, because I mean, we can talk about it does this, it does that, but how it looks is kind of some of the things that are neat to actually understand, and then where are they different is the next piece of it. So I'm logged in to Dynamics 365 right here, and happen to be into our application that we call Marshall, and into the web interface. And if I want to go into see kind of one of the building blocks, the first building block that I'm going to talk about is the building block that is around visibility of the workflow. So Renee showed you guys in GP how you can, if you're looking at a PO, you can go drill into a PO and kind of see a little bit of the history. Where's it at? How far is it along that workflow? Dynamics 365 is a little bit different in that, one of the building blocks that we've got that we can use is what we call a process bar. Okay, so here I've actually, I'm looking at an employee and at a particular workflow or a process that I call personnel onboarding, where I've got, the first stage is collecting contact information, the second one is around screening, and the third one is around orientation. So within these, it allows me to quickly, when I have a look at it, see a little check mark here of which one I'm currently looking at, a little flag here that is telling me where this process is in its overall process, and then things like how long it's been active and move it to next stages. So in my contact, I just set up a couple real basic things: collect name, address, phone number. What that's going to do is fill in the rest of that card, if you will, that employee stuff down here, and it's just going to help me again. Here's what we do at this stage: go do this, go do this, go do that. When I'm done that, I can move it to the next stage, go do this. And finally, my last stage has the following things in it that physically sit there. So the first building block is, again, just that visibility, that process bar that allows us to see what's there. And one of the nice things about it is we can actually have a bunch of different processes related to different options. So one of the differences, as far as which process are we currently running, now I'm working with the same employee and they become an employee. This is my annual review process. This is my grievance process. This is my discipline process. This is my. So now that I've switched to my offboarding process, in my transition, I've got one step in there, which is whether I've completed my knowledge transfer, and then in my departure, did I collect their equipment? Did I do my exit interview, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of different options, a lot of different steps, but a real quick view of the first building block when we start thinking about workflows in the Dynamics 365, which is the process bar. The second thing that I kind of wanted to highlight a little bit is actually some of the features and functionality that sit within the actual workflows themselves. So working in conjunction with, what did I do here? So working in conjunction with that visibility, that process bar, is the actual workflow engine itself. And the workflow engine can, drive different types of workflows, ones that are auto-initiated. So it'd be something like, when we create a new employee, launch this workflow. When someone does this, go launch this workflow. No, I obviously clicked the wrong button. There we go. And let's go into my process center here. The other types of workflows that we can have are more so what the on-demand workflows. So let me just go grab a couple of them here. And I have a list of my different workflows. So on-demand might be something as someone, is going about doing their day and they need to say, hey, what, we need to run our I've got an unhappy customer, we need to run our customer, make them feel better workflow. Go run that workflow would be an example of an on-demand, as opposed to one that when this record gets created, it automatically gets fired off by the system. So if I go in and pick on one of these workflows, I'm just going to pick on a certification expiry 30 days before it happens. So somewhat relevant, again, when we're comparing to what Terry talked about a little bit and some of the workflows that exist inside the GPHR, similar types of things can be done inside of Marshall. So I've got a whole bunch of different pieces of information that I can see there. As far as what's there, I can see all the different ones, a whole history that are physically there, and then I can actually see, does it get run on demand or does it get fired manually? When does it happen? What are we watching for? Those types of things, and that then takes us into the steps. Okay, so the steps are probably a little more robust than what you see on the GP side of things, in that, we can do more than just send an email and or, move it to the next step. We can start to interact with the rest of your Office desktop, things like creating a task for somebody, creating an appointment for somebody, doing a few of the other things that that may be relevant as we're deciding what to do in the workflow. I don't want to, drill into too much into the details, but at the end of the day, this workflow around notification 30 days before workflow does the following basic things. And as you can see, this is more of a business analyst facing tool. You don't have to necessarily be a hardcore developer to make some of this work. I would highly suggest that everyone just gives it to everyone in the organization and see what happens. That would be a wise use of letting your end users go and creating a mess for yourselves. No, seriously, the secrets around workflow is having well-defined processes, starting small and building them out over time and evolving them. But for my basic expiry notification here, check some things, make sure that we actually have an expiry date before running it, make sure it's not in the past, make sure that et cetera, and at the end of the day, here's where we escalated, and or we can go out and send an email which sends out to somebody, hey, here's a heads up that somebody's expiry or their certification is expiring in 30 days, kind of thing. So you can think of lots of different ways that you might use it, a little more customizable, a little more as far as the GP ones comes with here's the ones that we've got, and you can control fields and options and who they do and variables on them, but you can't say, hey, we need one for payroll, and how do I go about doing that payroll one? Whereas as you start thinking about some of these other tools, it starts to become a little easier to think about how we could do some of those. So the third piece that, how are we doing for time? Ooh, okay. Third piece I'm just, I guess, likely just going to talk a little bit about. And that is, again, around similar to process flows, and that is, actually us being able to create dialogues or things like a script, if you will, of when we're going through a certain type of thing, similar to the business process flow, but this is more of an encapsulated, go do this, go launch this, here's what I do at this particular point in time, and it sits in as a complete object. So within the Dynamics 365 tool set, kind of the three real building blocks when we think about workflow are the process, the process bar that kind of gives us visibility into it. We have the actual workflows themselves that we can use, and then we have things like the dialog box. And at the end of the day, the net result of what that might look like, very similar to what you saw when Renee was showing. Here I've got an email on Donna telling us, hey, one of her certifications is set to expire in the next 30 days. Come on, hopefully. And similar to, you have control over the variables that show up in there and the wording that goes in, and the ability to say, okay, hang on, take me into that actual record so that I can see what's there and navigate there, and here I've got my employee and what actual certification we're looking at, what the expiry date is, and if there's register for any training, any notes. So really the information that I need, from an email where the system is pushing something, telling me to go do something based on an event that happens to make our processes happen. Okay, so that's a little bit about the Dynamics 365. So now the next question is, this is all great, but how do I start to decide which one makes sense? And there's not a simple answer. As we go back to some of those initial things that I talked about, who's being impacted? What licensing do we already have? How far are we going with this? Are there specific things we're trying to put in place? What else do we have in-house for tool sets, for licensing? Where are we going? What are we connecting to? Is it just around ERP information, or is it starting to get outside of those things? So we created kind of, a little chart to help you guys figure out which of those things kind of make sense. And we can extend them. We can extend a few of those out and do additional things with some customization and with some custom web services and objects to allow them to work in different places. But at the end of the day, Renee, you're going to jump in here real quick. If I was thinking that I want to get started with workflows, I wanted to keep my costs down. Most of it was around our financial GP information. GP workflows are a great way to get ourselves started. If we're thinking we're wanting to expand out beyond that, And we now start to get into the Dynamics 365 and the flow. And one of the big differentiators is, I would not suggest you go to the Dynamics 365 workflow engine unless you're doing other things in it. It ends up being an expensive licensing model just to use the workflow piece, in which case something more like the flow might make more sense. The other thing that you'll find is Renee and I were chatting as we were paddling down the river yesterday. I have a suspicion that Flow is going to become the generic workflow engine across a lot of the Microsoft platforms. So SharePoint has a workflow that will be replaced by service-based Flow kind of workflows, and Dynamics 365 as a workflow. I think over time that'll get replaced with the Flow workflow, because you can start leveraging that same technology across different types of things. Anything else you wanted to add to that? I'm good. Okay. So as Renee mentioned, from a licensing standpoint, when we look at a few of those things, we think about the GP workflow. As we mentioned, you're pretty good on from a licensing cost of not having to license additional users to go along with it. When you're looking at the flow as an option, there's a few things to keep in mind. One of them Renee mentioned is number of runs that you need per month. There's a cutoff at 750 where you have to start going to paid. One of the other big differences is how time sensitive it is. So the free version of Flow essentially might take half an hour to actually go execute. If you're running something that's a little more real time, and I got an unhappy customer and I need something to run that lets someone know right now to come down to the front desk, you may want to think of going a step beyond the free version of Flow to one of the licensed kind of versions. And gives you an idea of, a few of the, depending on your transaction, some of the different costs. So, questions, things that we didn't cover too quickly, or that you guys would like us to address?